The Olympic Games of ancient Greece: competition, sacred truce, and the pursuit of glory. Few phenomena in human history have managed to survive for thousands of years and transform into a global symbol of unity, peace, and physical excellence. The Olympic Games are the most striking example. Born in ancient Greece, they became the foundation of modern sporting culture, yet their original meaning was far deeper, broader, and more complex than a simple athletic competition. For the ancient Greeks, the Olympic Games were not merely sport. They were a sacred event in which religion, politics, ethics, and aesthetics were inseparably woven together. They were the moment when the fractured, frequently warring Greek city-states recognized their common identity, bowed before their gods, and celebrated the finest qualities of human nature: courage, nobility, and the pursuit of truth. The Games were a triumph of Kalokagathia. The ideal of harmonious unity between physical beauty and spiritual nobility. The first and most fundamental characteristic of the ancient Olympics was their profoundly religious nature. They were not secular entertainment. They were an act of worship. The Games were always held at Olympia, a sacred grove on the Peloponnese Peninsula, dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods. This was considered a dwelling place of the divine, and everything that occurred there was understood to be filled with the presence of the gods. The myths of foundation. The origins of the Games are wrapped in myth, connecting them to the greatest heroes and gods of the Greek world. According to one tradition, the Games were founded by Zeus himself. Having defeated his father, the Titan Cronus, in righteous combat, he established the first contests at Olympia to commemorate his victory. Another legend credits Heracles, son of Zeus. After completing his famous labors, including the cleansing of the Augean stables, he organized competitions to glorify his father. Heracles personally measured the boundaries of the sacred grove of Altus, and according to myth, paced out the length of the first stadium with his own feet, exactly 600 steps. The legend reinforced the idea that the rules and formats of the Games had divine origin and therefore divine authority. A third tradition centers on Pelops, the hero after whom the Peloponnese is named. To win the hand of Hippodamia, daughter of King Oenomaus, he was required to defeat the king in a chariot race. Pelops won, became king, and established the Games in gratitude to the gods for their assistance. Each of these founding myths served the same purpose: they anchored the Games in the sacred, making participation not merely an athletic choice but a religious obligation. Added. This connecting sentence makes explicit what the myths were doing culturally, rather than simply listing them. The religious ritual. Every 4 years, at the first full moon after the summer solstice, Olympia became the religious center of the entire Greek world. The Games opened with a solemn procession in which athletes, judges, priests, and ambassadors from every city-state participated together. The defining event of the first day was the hecatomb, the sacrifice of 100 bulls to Zeus. The blood of the sacrificial animals consecrated the altar, and the smoke of the burning meat rose toward the heavens, symbolizing the bond between humanity and the divine. Before competition began, every athlete swore an oath before a statue of Zeus, promising to abide by the rules, to compete without deception, and to fight with honor. Victory, in the Greek understanding, was not merely the product of physical training. It was a gift from the gods, a visible sign of their favor. To win was to glorify not only oneself, but the god to whom the Games were dedicated. Olympia itself was filled with temples and treasuries where city-states deposited magnificent offerings. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia was counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. At its center stood the colossal statue of Zeus, created by the sculptor Phidias from gold and ivory, one of the most celebrated works of art in antiquity. The athletic arenas were surrounded by sacred groves, creating an atmosphere of reverence that no modern sports venue can easily replicate. For a Greek, attending the Games was a pilgrimage, a way of drawing closer to the divine. The philosophy of agon. The religious dimension of the Games was inseparable from the Greek concept of agon, contest, struggle, competition. Agon ran through every sphere of existence: poetry, theater, philosophy, and sport. Theatrical festivals were themselves a form of agon. Philosophers debated in competitive dialogue. The Olympics were the highest expression of this principle, the arena where a human being could demonstrate excellence, virtue, and draw closest to the gods through both physical and spiritual achievement. Victory in the Olympic agon was considered the greatest good a mortal could attain in a single lifetime. The second defining feature of the ancient Olympics was the Ekecheiria, the sacred truce proclaimed in advance of and throughout the duration of the games. Ancient Greece was a world of perpetual conflict. There was no unified state, only hundreds of independent city-states, constantly competing for territory, resources, influence, and honor. War was not an exceptional event. It was a recurring feature of daily life. Against this background of endemic conflict, the Olympic Games became something extraordinary, a miracle of unity. Why the truce was necessary? The Ekecheiria served several essential purposes. First, it guaranteed the safety of athletes and spectators. Participants and pilgrims traveled enormous distances to reach Olympia, often crossing territories engaged in active hostilities. Without the truce, they could fall victim to military operations, pirates, or bandits along the route. Second, the truce made it possible for all Greeks to participate regardless of their political situation. It did not matter which city-state you came from, or whether your city was at war with another, within the bounds of Olympia, everyone was simply a Hellene, united by shared faith and shared culture. How it worked. Several months before the Games, special ambassadors called spondophoroi traveled from Olympia to every Greek city-state, proclaiming the arrival of the sacred month. From that moment, all military operations were required to cease. Violating the truce was considered not merely a political offense but a grave sin, a personal insult to Zeus himself, and could bring divine punishment upon the offending city. Penalties ranged from heavy fines to exclusion from future games, a humiliation no city-state wanted to bear. The truce did not always succeed in ending every minor skirmish across the whole of Greece. But it created a powerful precedent and a genuine zone of peace. Olympia itself was a demilitarized sanctuary, weapons were forbidden within its boundaries. For the duration of the games, an Athenian and a Spartan could stand side by side watching the competitions without fearing for their lives. That alone was remarkable. The Ekecheiria carried a profound ethical message beyond its practical function. It demonstrated that certain values stand above political ambition and short-term advantage. Peace, unity, and service to the gods were more important than any war. This principle of sacred truce is one of the noblest ideas of antiquity, and it is the idea that the modern Olympic movement attempts to revive through its own Olympic truce resolutions. Added, connection to modern Olympic truce resolutions at the UN, which grounds the ancient concept in something contemporary audiences will recognize. The Games and the formation of Greek identity. It was largely through the Ekecheiria that the Olympic Games played a defining role in shaping Pan-Hellenic consciousness. The Greeks understood themselves to be a single people, sharing language, mythology, religion, and values, despite the political boundaries and frequent wars that divided them. The Games at Olympia were one of the rare moments when that unity became tangible and felt. Standing together before the altar of Zeus, Greeks from every corner of the Mediterranean world experienced themselves as a single family. This sense of shared identity was particularly vital in the face of external threats. It was no coincidence that the Persian Wars and the height of Olympic prestige occurred in the same era. The third pillar of the ancient Olympics was the concept of honor. Participation in the Games was itself an immense privilege, and victory brought glory comparable to that of demigods. But this honor was inseparable from strict moral obligations. Who could compete? Eligibility for the Games was a privilege, not a right. Initially, only free men of Greek origin who had no criminal record and whose reputation was unblemished could participate. Women, enslaved people, and non-Greeks, barbaroi, were excluded from competition. Women could, however, participate indirectly in chariot racing as the owners of horses, though they did not drive them personally. Over time, as the Greek world expanded through Alexander's conquests and later Roman influence, restrictions on non-Greeks were gradually relaxed, but Greek identity remained the central criterion for most of the game's history. A competitor at Olympia was expected to embody the ideal Greek citizen, free, noble, clean before the law and the gods. Participation was not merely a personal choice but a matter of honor for an athlete's entire city-state. Cities regularly sponsored their finest athletes, sending them to Olympia as official representatives. Preparation and the oath. Preparation for the games was grueling. Athletes were required to arrive in Olympia a full month before the competitions began, and during that month they trained under the strict supervision of the Hellenodikai, the judges. Adhering to precise dietary and physical regimens. It was a period of both physical and spiritual preparation. Before competition began, each athlete swore his oath in the Bouleuterion before the statue of Zeus Horkios, Zeus as guardian of oaths. They swore that they had been training for no fewer than 10 months, that they were competing honestly, and that they would abide by all rules without resorting to deception. Breaking this oath was not merely dishonorable, it was an act of sacrilege. Fair competition and its enforcement. Honor was the athlete's most precious possession. A victory achieved through cheating carried no value. Worse, it brought disgrace upon the athlete and upon the city-state that had sent him. The rules were enforced rigorously by the Hellenodikai, who had the authority to impose immediate punishment on violators, including corporal punishment on the spot. Perhaps the most striking evidence of how seriously fair competition was taken was the institution of the Zanes, bronze statues of Zeus, funded by the fines paid by athletes who had violated the rules. These statues stood at the entrance to the stadium, and every competitor entering the arena passed them, reading the names of those who had been disgraced. The inscription on each one carried the same message. At Olympia, victory is won not by money, but by swiftness of foot and strength of body. Victory is not bought, it is earned through honor. Shame was the punishment an athlete feared more than physical pain or defeat. The reward of victory, the wreath and eternal glory. The most striking feature of the prize system in the ancient games was its deliberate rejection of material reward. The victor, the Olympianikos, received only a wreath of branches cut from the sacred wild olive tree, trimmed by a young priest using a golden knife. No gold medals. No trophies. No prize money. And yet this simple olive wreath was the most coveted award in the Greek world. It symbolized not wealth, but divine favor, glory, and a form of immortality. Upon returning to his city-state, the victorious athlete was received as a hero. He entered through a breach made in the city wall. A symbolic statement that a city with such a champion needed no other defense. Statues were erected in his honor both at home and at Olympia itself. The great lyric poet Pindar composed victory odes, eponychia, celebrating his achievement, performed at banquets attended by the city's finest citizens. He received lifelong privileges, free meals at the public hall, exemption from taxes, and the finest seats at the theater. His name was inscribed in the official victor lists, preserved for centuries. The glory of an Olympianikos outlasted the man himself. His name became immortal. The ancient Olympic Games were held continuously for nearly 12 centuries, from 776 BC until 393 AD, when the Roman Emperor Theodosius I banned them as a pagan celebration, ending an unbroken tradition that had outlasted empires. Though the ancient games are long gone, their legacy has never disappeared. At the end of the 19th century, through the efforts of Pierre de Coubertin, the Olympics were revived in a new global format. The modern games differ substantially from their ancient predecessors. They are secular, they include women and professional athletes, and political pressures weigh upon them in ways the Greeks never experienced. But the core ideas first crystallized at Olympia have endured. The pursuit of excellence, Citius, Altius, Fortius, faster, higher, stronger. The principle of fair competition and respect for one's opponent. The aspiration toward an Olympic truce. The understanding that athletic achievement is a form of human dignity, not merely entertainment. The olive wreath, still one of the defining symbols of the Olympic movement, reminds us of a time when sport was a sacred act, when honor was the highest prize, and when the greatest ambition of a free man was not to accumulate wealth, but to stand before the gods and be found worthy. The ancient Greeks showed humanity that competition need not be merely a mechanism of domination. It can be a path toward unity, peace, and nobility. That is their true and enduring gift to the world.